Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to another edition of Meet the Methodologist. And we're very excited to have Dr. Brian Boyd from Arizona State visiting us to give a webcast lecture. And so what we want to do is spend some time with Brian this morning and get some of his views on research and scholarship and the state of affairs in research methods and strategic management. So, Brian, welcome to Detroit.
Thank you, sir.
So, Brian, as it turns out, it's my perception that there aren't really that many strategy scholars that are interested in research methods. What led to your interest in this area?
Well, actually, I think it's probably more because I'll call myself an orphan in the area of strategic management. I don't have a business degree. My doctorate is in communication. I've done a master's in communication. And for whatever reasons, the programs I went through had a very strong method emphasis, and my master's had 3 methods courses where we actually did a semester of research design, semester of non-parametric stats, semester of multivariate, right? And so then when I went and did my doctorate at the Annenberg School, which is very interdisciplinary, we had exposed to methods in a lot of different areas. And my committee chair was formerly an org behavior prof, right? And so that was the standard of rigor that I got exposed to. And so that just became the norm. And when I started doing work in strategy, it was just a natural extension of that.
So you mentioned those graduate courses. Was there any one that was a favorite? And if so, why that particular one?
I'll actually back up a little bit before that. My single most favorite class in my whole undergraduate program was econometrics. And I thought that there was something insanely cool, but emphasis on the insane, that the prof had us go through, do our consumption, investment, and government spending models, and do all of our tests for multicollinearity and heteroscedasticity and all these other things, and then we had to do it all by hand. So the whole semester was doing the matrix algebra, right, to run all these things, and then at the end of the term, we got to input all this stuff. It was like 30 years worth of data, so it's a really small data set, except when you're doing the matrices by hand. And we ran it in a computer, and the whole thing ran, like in a millisecond, and we could compare our numbers out to, 2-3 decimals and go, wow. And so that was actually very cool, and I thought that I thought that was very neat. We got exposed to path analysis when I was doing my master's, and then we did a whole semester of structural modeling in my PhD program, and that was kind of the extension of that oh wow moment in the econometrics class of you could actually do these really complex models. And little kid, hammer, they bang on everything that way, and so for me it's structural models bang on everything that way.
Well, that's certainly something I can relate to. Do you remember anything about the challenges of being learning methods as a grad student?
I did what was basically a self-defined minor in methods, and as part of that, I went over and sat through the year-long PhD sequence in econometrics, and so I was living with the doctoral econ students, and I came to the conclusion very quickly that I was the village idiot. Because you get some really strong math skills over in the econ department, and they were doing matrix algebra in class. They were doing derivative of matrices on the board on the fly, and I was like, wow, never occurred to me that you would actually want to do that, right? And I went into the prof after and said, I think I'm in over my head. He said, we were just doing that for fun.
Okay, so. Through that time, did you pick up a favorite book that really had an impact on you at the time, or do you have a favorite methods book that you rely upon a lot currently?
I am a serial collector of methods books, and so my favorite book is the book that gives me the most utility for a given revise and resubmit. And so my strategy for books is whatever you do in a paper in the empirical section, you're going to get a reviewer who's going to say either why did you do this, or just more bluntly, that's wrong, right? And it's a guarantee that any part of any aspect of your design, somebody's going to have questions with that. And so I spend a lot of my time in the revision process, right? It's kind of like searching through law books for precedents and examples. And so I have a large assortment of different books on different topics. And so my favorite is the one that allows me to answer that particular question.
On
where
that particular
where I can
day.
pull that quote out and say, look, right, it's, Bolin says this, or Haydick says this, or we can even go back and say Sorensen Stronghorst said this. And so I will embrace any book that's going to be helpful to me along the way.
Well, since those times as a graduate student, you obviously have had a very successful career, and as a result of that, you have a lot of experience as a reviewer of substantive papers in the area of strategic management. And I was wondering whether you could comment on what you see as the most frequent limitations or shortcomings of the papers that you review, either in terms of theory or in terms of research methods.
I think on the method side, and I'm talking specifically about strategy studies here, right? And that's my scope. I've got a personal bugaboo about measurement issues, and that goes directly back to the influence of having an OB prof as my advisor, where the first thing we focused on was really strong attention to measuring constructs in a very precise manner. And I've done a couple papers on that, and I think that we're making considerable progress, but it's still an issue for us as a field. In the talk I'm going to do a little later today, I think it's surprising that although we've moved more SEM more and more into the core curriculum training for doctoral students, what we actually see if we're looking at strategy studies, that mediation types of models, although when they're done very well, they're still done very rarely. And so we look in SMJ, we see maybe only 5% of the studies are using mediation as a tool, and it's a really useful tool, but it doesn't get as much exposure, I think, as it could. In general, I think that the area strategy is doing a really good job at making some progress. And we were talking about this last night at dinner. There's a lot of different forces that are driving that, but it's certainly more visible now, and I think it's on more people's radar screens. When I do talks with graduate students, the way I pitch it is, since we are strategy, it's a competitive edge if you can ask questions that other people can't ask, and there's a real utility in the publication process to be able to frame questions that not everyone else is doing.
So, what about some of those forces that are impacting an interest in research methods and strategy?
I think there's a variety of things that are going on. I will shill briefly for my colleagues, Don Berg and Dave Ketchum. They've got this research methodology and strategy management, or RMISM, right, which is in its maybe fifth or sixth volume, but it's this really handy collection of chapters on a variety of different topics. Really cool resource and very helpful. We also see a stream that's been emerging, pretty much starting in the 90s, but relatively slow to get going, catching on more, where we see people doing reviews of different areas. All right, Dave has done some of that. Don has done that. A variety of other people have done that as well. But I think that SMJ is increasingly willing to publish those. They have a lot of impact in driving an interest in best practices. That lead article or the article in the initial volume of ORM, right, that was talked about the issues of methodology and strategic management. I think really helped as well to kind of push that to the forefront and make it an important topic.
So within this emerging literature of research methods as applied to strategic management, are there areas in which you think methodologists have their eye on the ball and are focusing on the right things, and are there areas where there are some missed opportunities that would benefit the field if people were to pay more attention?
I think that strategy as an area is somewhat of a high variance field, and I suspect that part of that is because it's a relatively younger discipline, right? Management in general is a relatively young discipline, and strategy within that is even newer. I'm a big believer in the whole Kuhnian paradigm perspective on things, right? early stage paradigms means there's a lot of disagreement about what you do, not just theory, but also in terms of methods. And so I think that leads to a lot of variability in how we approach research questions. You have some papers that will do that, be like amazingly sophisticated. Others, it can be a little bit more rudimentary. And because the field is relatively young, the reviewers look at that and they say, hey, they both work, because we're trying to get a grasp still on what it means to do strategic management. And so as a result of that, one of the things that we see is that in a particular given area, in terms of a tool or certain types of questions, you see all sorts of variability, and these different content analyses that have been published. The general conclusion is some aspects of it are handled really well, other aspects are not handled as well. Recurring themes, we don't talk about power in general in terms of strategy research. We don't talk about measurement so much. Some problems are identified early and rectified. Others, not really so much, right? But there is this great stream of these different papers that will say, what exactly is the state of the art for configuration studies, right? So Jeremy Short and others did a paper in 2008, I think, that just said, what is the state of the art for configuration? And then we see that being done in a variety of other areas as well. And simply identifying, what the exemplary points are of these research and those other areas for improvement, are really helpful for people who are preparing papers, right? Because then that serves as a guide for you of these are the minimum standards that we need to adhere to. But then there's also these opportunities where there's other areas that haven't been as developed as well. And so that becomes a way to build a study that's going to be stronger relative to some of the other articles.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the emergence of research methods in the area of strategic management. Something like that doesn't happen without people that are championing. And I think that you've been involved over the years in championing scholarship in the area of research methods for strategic management. Could you give us an overview of some of your efforts that have contributed to that?
Well, thank you for that, but I'm a very tiny cog in a very big machine. Right? No, it is. It's right. The discipline is very large, and the amount of influence that a person exerts on that is bounded.
Yes.
But when I write an article, and the way that I've always approached an article is I start out with saying it has to be an interesting question, and although we emphasize theory, there's this issue of practical relevance that's really important for me. Combined with that, I've always tried to do something interesting methodologically in every paper that I do. And so that's been something that I always considered to be kind of implicit versus explicit. So that would mean applying different types of tools, focusing on aspects that relate to measurement, maybe looking at contingency effects, stuff I'm going to talk about later today. And it was always just there, and it was just kind of buried in the paper. And so I had this agenda on methodology, but it was a stealth agenda because there's this perception in strategy that we don't care about methods. And we do, but it's framed a little bit differently. And at some point in my career, this transition happened where I was a stealth methodologist, where someone pointed at me and said, "You're a methodologist," and I said, "Really? I didn't know." And so it just kind of evolved, and I started writing papers that were more explicitly focusing on methods issues. And I think that Steve Gove and Mike Hitt and I had a couple of papers that came out in SMJ in 2005 that focused specifically on construct measurement issues, right? And that was a paper or a set of papers that really just focused on the methodological side of what the implications are. And it was interesting because it was two papers. It was sent off to SMJ as one article, and we had this article. It was called Socrates, Strategy, and Structural Modeling. And the whole rationale for the article is I was standing in the shower one day, right, which is where you get your ideas sometimes. And I was in the shower, and I had this thing that came to me that said, the Socrates parable of the shadows on the cave wall is he was really talking about structural equation models with multiple indicators. He just didn't have the math at that point, or maybe he did and he just chose not to share it to leave knowledge creation for other people that came later. But that whole idea of viewing the world imperfectly is latent constructs. And so we framed this whole paper around that. and actually the entire first page of the manuscript was a summary and some discussion of the Socratic dialogue. So I thought it was really cool. I was sending a paper off to SMJ where the entire first page of the manuscript is talking about citations that are a couple thousand years old. I just thought that was awesome. So anyhow, we sent this paper off, and there was a content analysis side and a reanalysis of the diversification, Domhood and Lev types of stuff. And what ended up happening is when this got accepted, we got a conditional accept, and the condition was that we would be willing to split it into 2 articles, right? And so we got this letter, and we looked at it, and I called Mike and said, Mike, do you have any problems if we do it as 2? And he said no, and I talked to Steve, and he said no, and I talked to him again, and so we said, sure, we'll be happy to do it as 2 articles. And then after, Mike said, we should have held out for 3, right? and I don't know what the third one would have been. But so that became, I think, much more explicitly just a purely method focus on that. And then since then, I've been writing more papers that have looked more specifically at method issues. And so it's fun, right? And so I'm a methods person who's out of the closet. And,
there you go. Well, and there are many people who are happy about that. So you mentioned earlier your webcast presentation that you're going to give here in an hour and a half or so. Could you describe the origins of it and give a brief summary for our Meet the Methodologist viewers?
It is a 15-year-old project. And so I'm very excited that it's a 15-year-old project. I have I got a paper that just came out in AMJ last week with Marta Gelikanitz, and it is a 10-year project. We started it a decade ago, and it's just coming out now. And so in comparison, this thing is something that's actually a long-term project. Mm-hmm. And if you're watching this and you're a doctoral student, right, not everything has 10 or 15-year gestation cycles. And we had a paper last year, and it went from the concept to acceptance in just under 12 months. Right? So there's a lot of variability with what we do. But I had gotten interested in this idea for a project literally 15 years ago, which was to assess how we actually use contingency tools in the field of strategic management. The paper I'm talking about today draws heavily from Venkat Raman's '89 article where he comes up with this typology of fit. That was a fairly recent article at that point in time. And so I started looking at doing content analyses, and as a result, I ended up doing a symposium at the Academy of Management meeting sometime in the 90s, and it was a symposium on contingency theory, and it was really neat. Paul Lawrence came and talked, Dan Schindel came and talked, Anil Gupta, John Prescott, and Lex Donaldson all came and talked very big picture. And I'd had some graduate students that I was working with at the time, and we did a much smaller scale content analysis of the use of contingency tools at that particular juncture, right? Because the time frame was very different. And we had done that, and it was really cool. And then it went on the back burner, and it went further and further and further on the back burner until I keep file folders of potential project ideas. Right, and it was like so far back, it was now like 2 feet towards the rear of potential ideas. And I have been harvesting old paper ideas. So I've got 2 things that have come out that have each been 10 years since the idea in the actual paper. Mm-hmm. And so I figured I could reach back a little bit further. And so Cotty Haynes is a former doctoral student of ours, and Cotty and I have been working on this for a while. Conceptually, and then things really kind of snowballed. And the paper is actually Cotty, Mike Hitt, Don Berg, and Dave Ketchen. So we've got this really cool assortment of authors that we're working on this. And so it's a manuscript that's out for review right now. But very extremely slow gestation period. Pretty much we're looking at the birthing cycle for elephants and saying, gosh, that's fast. That is just like so blindingly fast, right? It's like the tortoise gets knocked over by a snail, and they ask him, "Did you get a look at him?" I said, "I couldn't see. He was moving way too quickly."
Well, you mentioned doctoral students, and we hope that we have doctoral students that enjoy our Meet the Methodologist webcast recordings. And I always like to ask our guests whether they have any particular advice
Well, the first piece of advice, and we got right, at least one doctoral student here, is run, don't walk for the nearest exit, because it's a long, slow process, and it's kind of painful at times, and that really just sets the stage for you to go and become an assistant professor, which is also a long, slow process and occasionally painful at times. But it's also rewarding. But I think that emphasis on slow is things don't happen quickly in the article development process. Rewards are delayed. There's not a lot of positive reinforcement in the review cycle, and it requires a certain mindset to be able to embrace that and enjoy it as opposed to just tolerate it. I think the other thing that can be really helpful, and this is what led to the development of this project. Macmillan and McGrath have this great book on entrepreneurship called The Entrepreneurial Mindset. And one of the things that they talk about in this book is a way of thinking to be like an entrepreneur is you keep something called an opportunity register. And the opportunity register is as you go about your daily life, whether you're shopping or on the phone or if you're in an elevator or whatever, things will spark to you, right, as potential ideas for business possibilities. Oh, we could make it this, or we could do with this, or this is a market that isn't served. And the idea is you put these on little recipe cards, basically, and you keep them in a little box. And as other things transpire, you go back and say, oh, this fits on that idea, and you add to those over time. And then periodically, you'll go through your little recipe box. You go, oh, I forgot about this idea. This one could be really good. That one's not so good. And you go back and forth, and you do that. So I've used, even before I read their book, I use this opportunity register perspective or approach for coming up with article ideas. And so I may see something in a newspaper, I may see something somewhere else, and I go and I make little notes. And sometimes those turn into articles right away, sometimes they turn into articles 15 years later, right? And it really is a very diverse set of stimuli. So I'd done a paper on executive compensation back in the mid-90s. The entire basis to get me started on that paper was when the first George Bush president went to Japan and threw up on the prime minister. And as I was reading that article, there was some commentary that he'd brought all these American executives with him, many of whom were highly paid, right? And that was literally the precipitant for doing something on compensation. And if he'd not thrown up on them, I never would have probably noticed that, right? So there are sometimes these random types of factors, right, that lead you into coming up with ideas. One time I was at the SMS meeting and I was talking with someone in the elevator, and I got out of the elevator and I ran to my room and got a notepad and wrote the stuff down. And once I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, "Ooh, this would be a cool thing." And same thing, I went and ran and I got a piece of paper. I scribbled some stuff down. I went back to bed. I got up in the morning the next day. I looked at the notepad. I had no idea what it meant. So it came and it was gone. But some projects, because they have really, really slow gestation periods, the idea can still be good 5 years or 7 years later. And so you go and you take that long view and you really try and accumulate, all of these different potential manuscripts. It can be very helpful. The one other thing that I'll embellish to that too is very often you may have an idea and you're just not able to act on that at all. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about having co-authors is they can take an idea that is absolutely dead in the water, right? And just by looking at it a little bit differently, tweaking the concept, it goes from something that's non-publishable to something that's really interesting, right? And I've been on both sides of that, and it's been very helpful.
Good. Let me close with one final question, asking you whether there's anything special that you do to draw inspiration or motivation for your work.
I read a lot of different news sources and things of that nature to try and get ideas, right, for possible paper projects like the executive compensation study. I find personally that there's that almost random stimulation that will lead you to put different things together. In the strategy literature, we talk about environmental scanning, and you do this relatively unstructured viewing of your environment, and then part of the task of the manager is to put these discrete elements together. And so I think there's a counterpoint to that on the research side, where you're just aware or cognizant of a lot of different things that are happening, and you get those sparks for the paper idea when two of those bits or more of those bits start to collide. You go, oh, that could be a cool thing, and very often that's unformed. On the idea generation side, the way that I approach an article, actually trying to come up with hypotheses, is, and so this speaks towards the inspiration side, I guess, is I do two very different stages. And so the first stage is this exhaustive literature review. Once I've decided, hey, this is a topic I'm curious about, so I will go and get everything that I can find on a given topic, and then I read through that, and I make notes, and I just take pages and pages of notes on all of these different things, and then I put it down and I literally walk away from it. And I will go and spend days outside. I'll go hiking. I'll sit in the forest and camp away from my computer, my cell phone, and I deliberately not think about it, right? And in the process of deliberately not thinking about it, do a lot of gardening too. And the gardening is like very helpful when you're out there, right? And you're having this kind of Whitman-esque toiling with the earth and the whole thing. And then as you're doing other stuff, the pieces start to coalesce. And then I go back inside. I do more structured work. And then I go back outside. I actually do a lot of my writing outdoors. I cannot write in an office, and I've written journal articles on park benches, on beaches, in the woods, and that becomes if I really want to write good stuff, I have to be outside, and so I will periodically inform my wife that I'm taking all of my stuff and a big stack of articles. Right? And I go away. And once I flew to the Maldives, and I had an entire suitcase filled with articles. And they were like, they picked up the bag when I got off the boat. It's like, what is this? And I pulled out, about this many journal articles. I wrote a book chapter on a cruise ship, and I was walking down the hallway, and I had this giant stack of articles, a bunch of legal pads and pens, and the captain saw me. He's like, this is a cruise ship. People are vacationing, they're having fun. What on earth are you doing? I'm writing a book chapter, and I'm having a blast. And I sat up in the restaurant in the front with all the glass and looking out over the ocean, and I wrote an entire book chapter in a week on a boat.
Well, it certainly is a model that works for you, and we congratulate you on your success, and we are very appreciative. I didn't mention it earlier, but this is Brian's second visit to CARMA. And so we're looking forward to your talk, and thanks for sharing your perspectives and your experiences this morning.
Cool. Thank you, Larry.